ECW Hardcore Revolution on the N64 was not one of the games that I was looking forward to playing. I really doubt that this version is going to be an improvement over the PS1 version, which I thought was fine. It's pretty average. If you like the control scheme from WWF Attitude, then you'll probably like this game because it's basically a reskin of that game. Yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. I'm not really super excited for this. So let's get this out of the way really quick. There's no storyline for this game, but it does have a career mode. It lets you kind of imagine that there is some kind of a storyline in this. But it's really not. It's more of a tedious thing to really go through just because of how many matches you have to play, how many times you have to do the same thing. It's a very long game mode, and while it was kind of fun to do back in the late 90s, now it's just kind of like, man, this did not this did not go the same way that I thought it would, or the way I remember it going. This career mode got passed up by so many other games, and yeah. This one just lacks a lot of the same features from the career modes on, the SmackDown games and also the better WWF games on the N64. The gameplay can feel a little awkward at times, and it seemed like the controls became less responsive as the game progressed. Part of that could have just been me, so take that with a grain of salt. The more I played this game, the more just things started annoying me. The manual is online, which is nice. The quality isn't super great, but at least it's there, so you can look up what the buttons do and everything. Especially if you're not used to playing on the N64, you might not really know just what buttons you need to press. ECW Hardcore Revolution has a pretty big roster of wrestlers. There are a bunch of game modes that you can play. I spent most of my time in the career mode, but there are other options if you don't want to go through that. Maybe you just want to experience this thing and see what they did to it. Really what they did to the ECW product more than anything else. The wrestlers have a life bar, which is honestly something I prefer. I like being able to see where my opponent is at, where my life bar is. I kind of like the idea that they slowly refill as the match goes on. There's just weird things about this whole engine and this series of games that are using it that I do like, but then it does something kind of stupid that just annoys the hell out of me. There are a handful of little things that, really will let you know that this is an ECW game. You can have matches where the barbed wire replaces the ring ropes, and you have some hardcore matches. After that, it's basically WWF Attitude with a different coat of paint on it. There's not a whole lot that really separates it from, Warzone and Attitude. It's just the same thing. So if you hate those games, you're not going to like this one very much. I do want to point out that you don't always have to open the menu to see what moves are available. I've seen people say this before, and it kind of confused me a little bit because you can just memorize the moves on the stupid menu. You don't always need to open it up to see what's available to you. It's a weird thing that I've heard people complain about, but when I go through this, no, it's fairly easy to just remember the moves. There are a lot of them, so maybe you might need a refresher on some of them, but for the most part, you can memorize like 4 or 5 moves, and you can just do the buttons for those over and over. You don't necessarily need to open up the menu every single time. There is a little bit of rubber band AI in this, so you can't just destroy your opponent without getting hit. Eventually, they are going to fight back. It's a little thing, but it is kind of cool. But at the end of the day, this really is not the ECW product from the 90s. It's more like the ECW product from like the late 2000s. I actually don't mind the gameplay in this. It isn't all that great, but it isn't terrible. This would be like the mediocre game out of all of them on the N64 and on the PS1 as well. And probably on the Dreamcast, because I'm just now realizing I have to play that game when I look over those wrestling games. I have played this same engine so many times, it's really annoying. And I'm kind of glad that I'm at least almost done with it for the N64. If you liked how WWF Attitude looked and how WWF Warzone looked, then you'll probably like this because it's essentially the same. The rings are going to look a little bit different because they've got an ECW coat of paint on them. The wrestlers have just been modified to look like the ECW wrestlers. It's not a bad looking game, but it just isn't as good as some of the later 90s and early 2000s games. It's fine. Perfectly average. There is a little bit more blood in this game than I remember with Attitude, but aside from that, it's really not that bad looking of a game. Like the PS1 version of the game, blood just randomly appears on wrestlers. There's really no rhyme or reason for it. You could be punching someone or hit them with a DDT, and they'll just start bleeding from the stomach or the back or the wrist. It's weird. It's kind of awkward at times, but one good thing about it is that they will get a little bloodier as the match goes on, so that's kind of cool, but yeah, it's not really something that I could say, oh, that's awesome, or anything like that. It's just a little weird at times. The animations look good. The ring entrances look good. It's kind of a decent looking game with every once in a while you'll see something that'll go, oh, that's cool. It is a little dated by 2000 standards, but not too bad. It's really just a decent looking game. I would say it's got pretty average graphics. Even when you compare it to some of the blockier looking games that got released, I don't think this looks any better than those. The textures are smoother, but yeah, it's not going to blow anyone away, especially by today's standards, which is not really a fair thing to say about it, but I think at the time this was a pretty average looking game. So I looked into 4 reviews for ECW Hardcore Revolution from the year 2000. These are taken from Nintendo Power, N64 Magazine, Game Informer, and GameSpot. 2 of the magazines gave the game an 8 out of 10, the other 2 gave it less than a 6 out of 10. So at the time, this would have meant 2 people thought the game was great, the other 2 would have thought it was an average game. GameSpot gave it the lowest with a 4.2 out of 10. Nintendo Power gave it a 5.9 out of 10. Game Informer and N64 Magazine gave it an 8 out of 10. This was a little surprising to say the least. I wasn't expecting to see 2 positive reviews like that, especially since this is just a reskin of WWF Attitude, and there were other games that were much better released at the time. The Game Informer review focused mostly on the Creator Wrestler mode, which is very good for this game, and it kind of acknowledges that this is just a reskin, but praised the improvements to it. There weren't that many, but at least they acknowledged there were some improvements to it. The N64 Magazine review is just frickin' baffling. The only conclusion I can come to is that the reviewer really liked WWF Attitude a lot, or they didn't want to rock the boat with a bad score, or one that was an average score. I just want to point to the reviewer section where the reviewer writes, Acclaim's wrestling is still comprehensive and authentic, but lacks both improvement and a big name license. In justifying the granular scores, he points out that the game isn't much different from WWF Attitude. I should have looked at what his score was for that, because this just really confused me when I was going through his entire article. It was a very confusing article. So Nintendo Power has, or at least had, a committee of people that would review these. And really the only positive score or positive review was about the creative player mode. And that kind of boosted all the other scores up because one person really liked the game and two people really hated it. Some of the more memorable quotes from the reviewers were, "The game made me feel dirty. It's trash that's fun to watch, but not something I'd recommend participating in." It was just kind of fun to see that as some of the reviewers are just savaging this game. One fun thing to note was this review is right above the review for Daikatana, and I really thought that was kind of funny. It's very interesting going through these older magazines and looking up the scores. GameSpot's review kind of echoes my thoughts on this game. It isn't bad, but in no way does it represent the style of wrestling that ECW uses. That review, I was like, yeah, this one's pretty much how I feel about the game. These reviews mostly bring up the same issues that I have with it. I'm a bit more forgiving of the engine just because I kind of liked Attitude and Warzone. Yeah, it is just WWF's interpretation of what an ECW game would look like. Or at least that's how it feels because, the reuse of the engine. This would have been a pretty good game if it was released in 1998 or even in 1999. But with it being put out in 2000, it just showed the age of the engine that they were using for it. It just wasn't as good as many of the other games. I think this is probably a okay middle-of-the-road wrestling game on the N64. It's right up there with Warzone and Attitude, and I think it's not as good as Mayhem. I wish Acclaim had spent some more time with the game engine and actually modified it more. They would do that with Anarchy Rules, but they didn't do it here, and it just kind of results in an average game. That I don't really like this version of it either. It's not the best. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.